So I get Gardasil, I go home, and shortly after, my parents found me basically unconscious, curled up in a fetal position on our couch, and they drove me to the hospital immediately. I was just given a slew of conditions that I had never had before. And so I guess I'll just list them off here. I had occipital neuralgia, which is an inflammation of the nerves at the base of your skull. I had vaccine-induced encephalitis, which is swelling of the brain, irritable bowel syndrome, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, tendinitis, secondary amenorrhea.
You're listening to A Real Human Being, a podcast about conversation and connection and being human. My name is Josh Putnam, and I believe that everybody is worth listening to. That connection is powerful and healing, and that we need each other. Hello, everyone. Welcome in to the show today. I am really excited about my guest. I have a special guest, somebody who I met on Instagram. Her handle is Healing from Gardasil, and her name is Lauren. And I met her, a little while ago. I think over the last year or so, we've talked a little bit. But she's come in. I've asked her to come in to talk about her story, specifically as it relates to her vaccine injury. And this is a hot topic, especially right now with all the COVID and all the new vaccines. And although they're not really vaccines, but we can talk about that later. But I think it's so important that we start to hear and really listen to people's actual stories and listen and not just dismiss them and to realize that these are not real and that they are not rare. Sorry, that they are real but not rare, and so that we can start to address the actual issue instead of ignoring it or sweeping it under the rug. So, Lauren, welcome in and thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for bringing me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Seriously. It's a hard topic to discuss, and I just admire all of those like you who are out there and willing to put themselves out there and risk being dismissed and criticized and ridiculed, which I'm sure you've had, your fair share of.
Yes, absolutely. It's really unfortunate the way that society has kind of handled the whole vaccine topic, because they've really polarized it. You can either be pro or anti. And so, a lot of us anti-vaxxers, per se, as we're called, we're getting that term, we're labeled as that, but that's really, and more appropriately, we'd be called ex-vaxxers, because, we were people who were pro-vaxxers, trusted the system, vaccinated. And it wasn't until we learned the hard way that vaccines do come with risks that we started to research, speak up, try to warn others. And because of the characterization of us, no one listens, and it's really unfortunate.
Right. There's an emotional perception that's been cultivated. And so the moment you say, there are a lot of like particular things that you could talk about, that the moment that you say those words, oh, I was injured by a vaccine, there's an emotional response in most people to immediately shut off the brain and say, that's nonsense. That doesn't happen. You're not only just like it kind of triggered some even vitriol or animosity toward those who would speak out, and it's like, this is not the environment to have a productive conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'll be in a conversation expressing very valid concerns about vaccine safety and making valid points about ingredients or things that were missed in trials or things that were misrepresented. And all people respond is, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. I hope you die. Like I've had threats online, insane comments. And, I made the mistake once. I tried to start talking on Twitter about this experience.
Wow.
Very, very bad platform to use, because really, and unfortunately, it's a lot of people my age, this Gen Z millennial generation, they haven't done any research, and they feel very comfortable just being very cruel online to someone who's sharing inconvenient facts that go against what they've been taught. So it's hard.
Totally. And it's funny you mentioned, I found like there's a different experience on all of the different social media platforms.
Mhm.
Like, it's like
Yes.
there's a different group that's kind of dominating that. Like Facebook is, I mostly stay away from it because it's boring to me, but also because it's like, there's there's people more of my generation, like, who are, so I'm 37, and so it's like there's and there's a lot of kind of people who are maybe not quite as open-minded, and
Yeah,
they're kind of
yeah,
set in their positions, and they're kind of comfortable with them, and
yes.
they're kind of not willing to adjust or be flexible, and it's hard talking about it there as well. And I haven't tried Twitter because I've never, it's been always been not that interesting to me, but I
Yeah,
know that a lot of people have had a hard time on Twitter.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, it got to the point for me where I was like, I'm putting all this energy in and I'm not making any progress. It's like communicating with a brick wall, really.
Right.
And
Right.
I was reaching more people on Instagram, and I
Yeah.
was having more productive connections and conversations. And yeah, so I kind of just, I'm still on Twitter, but I don't really
Yeah.
use it. I just kind of follow certain people, and yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is interesting because I think Instagram has been the most the most effective or the place that I've had the best most productive conversations or
Yeah,
been
yeah.
able to share without so much like
Mhm.
backlash or vitriol. Although the censorship is there, but from other people on the platform, it hasn't been quite as bad.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So,
Um, okay, so let's jump in. Let's give kind of a little backstory. You can tell a little bit about yourself if you'd like to. Just kind of give who you are, where you're from, anything interesting about you, and then just kind of start from the beginning of your story, your experience with vaccines, and then your injury and all that.
okay, for sure. So, I'm from Michigan, and growing up, I was perfectly healthy. I come from a very athletic family who values health. And so we were always doing water sports, or, going on walks, bike riding, like all these activities.
Mhm.
And so, that's kind of just my health background, my health history. I mean, I struggled with the occasional cold and flus like children would go through, but
Mhm.
nothing severe. And so, yeah, I mean, I was a straight A student. I was always on the honor roll, very involved. I was vice president of student council in middle school, and I was always trying to get involved in school and just do everything I can. And my biggest thing is that I was a volleyball player. So
Okay.
I have all three of my aunts were volleyball players. And so, growing up, I was like, oh, I really want to play volleyball. And so,
Yeah.
and I was good at it. I loved it. And so I played on a club team, and I ended up playing nationally. Um,
Wow.
and so I wanted to play college volleyball. And going into high school, I made varsity as a freshman. And, it was like a promising opportunity for me.
Hmm.
And it was something I was really passionate about. But that kind of all changed after Gardasil. So, yeah. And then regarding vaccines, my family, we honestly didn't even know anti vaxxers were a thing. It wasn't like
Really?
it wasn't like we were staunch pro vaxxers and that we didn't like anti vaxxers. We just didn't
Mhm.
even know
Didn't
there
really
was
think
a
about
debate.
it, or
Yeah, right. It
Mhm.
was just something that growing up, my parents were like, okay, this is good for you. We had a good relationship with our pediatrician. We trusted
Mhm.
him, and we were all my siblings and I were vaccinated on schedule.
Mhm.
And it was just something we just did. So we never asked questions. We didn't have really concerns about it. So yeah, I mean, that brings me to my eighth grade year. I went in for just a annual checkup. My mom was with me, and my pediatrician told me that I should get the Gardasil vaccine. And so I didn't know anything about it, obviously. And my mom actually told him no, not
Mhm.
because she had concerns of safety, but just because she thought it was unnecessary, because he told her it was for HPV. And she was saying, well, my daughter's 13. We can probably wait on that. We don't need to do it right now.
Mhm.
And so that's when he said, well, don't you want to protect your daughter from cervical cancer? And
Right.
obviously, whoa, cancer, that's a
Yeah.
scary word for a lot of people. And so for me at 13, I'm thinking, oh man, like I should really get this. It's going to protect me from cancer. And
Mhm.
my mom, I feel bad for her. To this day, she feels guilty because
Right.
in that office, he guilted her and basically he continued this
Hmm.
conversation trying to tell her she was a horrible parent if she didn't get this vaccine for me because I'm going to be at risk for cancer. Basically,
Hmm.
making it seem like I would die of cancer without this vaccine.
Right.
And we can get to it later, but factually, that is a lie. And that's actually why people are suing Merck right now for fraud because
Hmm.
none of those claims are true.
Hmm.
So, anyways, my mom feels guilty. I feel scared. We felt pressured. And honestly, that was the first time we've ever seen that side of my pediatrician because we had
Hmm.
never protested or gone against what he was saying before. And now all of a sudden, the nice guy we had known was not so nice. And so,
Right.
yeah, the pressure was there, and I ended up getting the first shot. And after the first shot, I did not have any negative reactions that I could tell. I didn't notice any changes. It was really after the second dose, because Gardasil is a 3-dose series. It was
Okay.
after the second shot that I started having all of these health issues.
And how long is in between each shot usually?
A couple months.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started the series in 2014 and then I finished it in 2015.
Okay.
So
And
yeah,
so did you get all 3 shots?
yes, I did.
Okay.
And like I said, we didn't know that vaccines even came with risks. When
Right.
you're in the office, they don't give you the vaccine package insert. They don't tell
Yeah.
you about the clinical trials, and they don't say, just so you know, this is like the side effects that could happen. They
Hmm.
just, they sell it to you really. And
Right. Or pressure you, which is what you
right,
experienced. Right.
right, exactly. So when I was getting these vaccines and then I started having the health issues, we weren't looking to the vaccine at all as a
Right.
cause. We were just thinking that this was just
Yeah.
happening to me. So that's why I finished the series, even though I'll tell you what happened after the second shot, but we didn't even think at the time that it
Yeah.
was related.
Well, and I think that is one of the biggest issues here is
Mhm.
that it's not always just like bang bang, right? It's not like you
Right,
get it and then you get a symptom.
right,
And I mean sometimes it is that does happen, but more often than not it's you get it and then a little while later or even after a second dose or a different vaccine or whatever,
hmm,
you start to develop something after some time. And so
right,
and and then couple that with the fact that your doctors are not, I mean, we'll get more into this, I think, too, but like, not only do you say they don't give you your package inserts, but like many of them have never even read them, right?
right,
So like they
right.
don't
And they're
even,
they're not very well educated on the actual side effects or how
right,
to monitor them or even how to report them.
right,
So
right.
it's right. It's
And
it's
so
not
it's on from both sides where you're uninformed, they're uninformed,
mhm.
and so but not just uninformed, but they are also conditioned to believe that it's impossible for it to
Right,
be
right.
harmful. So they're going to look at any other possibility, and there's such a distance in between the shot and then the symptom that
Mhm.
they just don't ever, not never, but they often don't connect those dots. And so
Right, right. And it's
and
it's part of the reason why vaccine injuries are so seriously underreported.
right, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And so
So
there was the HHS study, funded study, right, a few years ago that found, what was it, less than 1% that are reported.
yeah, they were saying that less than 1% of
Yeah,
vaccine injuries are actually reported.
yeah.
And honestly, I think it would probably be even worse than that.
That wouldn't surprise me, right?
Yeah,
Because of all of those factors. So it's not
right.
always obvious that that was the trigger. And it
Mhm.
might not only be the only trigger, right? It's that coupled with a bunch of other things as well or a certain condition that you might be in, um, that it's going to trigger something,
Mhm.
and so it just, people aren't looking for it,
Mhm.
and they're not taught to look for it, and the scientists aren't looking for
Mhm.
it because they're taught to not look for it, and so
Like the
people are not
vicious
seeing it.
cycle. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, so I go and I get the second shot. And that's really when things started to go downhill. And within a week of that second shot, I started to have headaches. And they started
Okay.
off just like these small, kind of pressure points in my forehead. And then, it starts progressing to the point where I'm having this sharp stabbing pain at the base of my skull. And I have to use my hands to show it because it would wrap like from the back of my skull all the way around my head in like this vice grip. I've never felt anything like that before.
Yeah.
Extremely painful, very debilitating, basically making me bedridden because
Yeah.
you can't function through it.
No, I
Um,
used to get migraines all the time when I was a kid, and like
mhm.
you're completely like disabled. You can't
Right,
move, you can't think, you can't like you can hopefully sleep. That's like your only
right,
only hope.
right, exactly. And it felt like there was a lot of pressure. And I often would tell my mom it felt like my brain was on fire. Like
Hmm.
that was really the only way to describe it.
Yeah.
And so, it got to the point where I was waking up with migraines, going to sleep with migraines. And I was having other neurological issues like brain fog.
Mm-hmm.
I was slurring my speech. I was having severe memory loss. Like I could not
Wow.
remember conversations or situations. Um, and so, all of these neurological things are starting to happen. And then I started developing these digestive issues. And
Hmm.
this was all within, a week to 2 weeks, maybe a month of that second shot. So
Okay.
it wasn't like seriously a long time away. It was
Right.
concentrated around the shot. So I started getting these digestive issues where I'm having severe abdominal pain, very much bloated, and everything I ate was making me nauseous.
Hmm.
I was having acid reflux, and I was severely constipated. I could not go to the bathroom for weeks
Hmm.
at a time,
Wow.
and again, had never had abdominal or digestive issues before. And then I start having these muscular and joint issues. So, earlier I mentioned I had been playing volleyball. I couldn't play anymore because I'd have these muscle spasms. And it was to the point where on several occasions, my coach would have to wheel me off the court in a chair because I
Wow.
couldn't walk. My legs were and she could see the muscles were contracting
Oh.
ridiculously. And it was incredibly painful. I was having joint pain in my wrists, especially the right wrist. Um, I remember I told my friend one day when we were in our science class, I was like, I think I'm pretty sure I broke my wrist here. Like it hurt so bad.
Oh.
But there was nothing wrong. I would go and get x-rays because of
Hmm.
this pain, nothing wrong. Right.
Hmm.
Um, and so the joint pain was in my wrists, my knees, and my ankles too. And my ankles would consistently swell
Wow.
during activities. And then I was having lower back pain. My hips were popping out of place, which was really weird. A lot of doctors I was seeing were marking on why my legs were different lengths because the hips were popping out of place.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so, yeah, just all very weird things. And
Wow.
it was unfortunate. I think the hardest part for me was the volleyball aspect because I felt like I was letting my teammates down. Like
Mm.
my motor reflexes were off. I couldn't respond as quickly. I couldn't
Yeah.
play. They were watching me run off the court in pain. And I mean, it makes me choked up just thinking about it. It was hard because to the outside, I looked fine to people. And
Right.
I didn't want people to think, oh, I'm making up my illness. Like I'm
Right.
choking on the court. Right. It
Hmm.
was very real experiences for me. But a lot of people didn't believe it, unfortunately, because
Right.
on the outside, I looked okay, which
Yeah.
honestly, that's what happens with a lot of people with chronic illness.
Yep.
Um, so, okay, other issues. If you see me looking, I wrote a list to make sure I don't
Mhm.
forget anything because
Yeah.
it's quite a lot that was going on. But my hair was falling out in chunks, and I've always had like thick curly hair, and it went pin straight, dead, was falling out, and I had neuropathy, so like tingling and numbness in my
The
hands.
nerves and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I had terrible circulation. So I wouldn't even be anywhere cold, and I would be shivering and I would be
Hmm.
freezing. And the really interesting thing is I got my first menstrual cycle ever, like within a week of getting that second shot, and then it never came back for years.
Really?
For like 3.5 years, I just never had another cycle.
Huh.
And then I was also struggling with tonsil stones, which I've never had before. They're like little
What's it?
calcifications. They're
Oh,
like
okay.
little calcifications in your tonsils.
Okay.
And it's weird. I've kind of been investigating this because it's such like an odd symptom. At first, I
Yeah.
didn't. Even after we figured out I was suffering a reaction to the vaccine, I didn't connect it to tonsil stones. It wasn't until I started meeting people on through social media who were remarking like, have you ever had tonsil stones? And I was like, yeah, I did get those. And
Uh,
that's another common thing between Gardasil girls, as I call them. So
Interesting.
really
Huh.
interesting. So I was having all these issues, and I'm missing school. I'm struggling to even stay on my volleyball team. I'm depressed. I'm
Yeah.
not eating, and it's just overall my health is deteriorating, a really bad situation. And so I go back into my doctor, my pediatrician, because we're looking for help. We're looking, especially with the migraines.
Hmm.
Um, we're just looking for some advice, what could be going on. And here's a direct quote. What he said to me: "You're just stressed from school."
Right. All of
And
that stuff.
I just sat there. I looked, and this time my dad was with me, and I looked at him like, "Are you kidding me? How can you say this? It's
Yeah.
not just stress. I'm not stressed at all. I was doing great in school."
Hmm.
So then he said, "You know what? I'll give you some Excedrin migraine. This should help." It didn't. And then he said, "While you're here, just to save you a trip, I see, and you're due for the third shot of
Oh
Gardasil.
my
Why don't you
gosh.
just get that?" And again, I wasn't even thinking about Gardasil. I wasn't thinking they
Right.
were connected. Neither was my dad. And so we
Hmm.
just thought, "Oh, that's really smart. Save us a trip.
Right.
We'll get Gardasil now." So I get Gardasil. I go home, and shortly after, my parents found me basically unconscious, curled up in a fetal position on our couch, and they drove me to the hospital immediately. And I was, my mom with the headaches, she used to have me rate on a scale of 1 to 10,
Hmm.
how bad is the pain today? And I told her I couldn't rank this. I felt like I was dying. And again, I felt like my brain was this time not so much fiery, just like it was going to explode. And the pressure in my skull was unbelievable.
Yeah.
So at this point, we knew this is the vaccine because it had happened so
Right
quickly
after.
and we could see the connection. So when we get to the hospital, I was in and out of the hospital for about a week. I missed the last 2 weeks of my 8th grade year. And I'll never forget, I was taking the final exams at home because I couldn't be in school.
Mm.
And while I was in the hospital, I was meeting with different specialists of all kinds. So gastroenterologists, neurologists, pain specialists. I was having my blood drawn, CAT scans, MRIs, ultrasounds, everything. And so when all was said and done, I was just given a slew of conditions that I had never had before. And so I guess I'll just list them off here. I had occipital neuralgia, which is an inflammation of the nerves at the base of your skull, which would explain that pain I was having starting at the base of my skull. I had vaccine-induced encephalitis, which is swelling of the brain, irritable bowel syndrome, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, tendinitis, secondary amenorrhea. So when you get your menstrual cycle and then you lose it. Let's see what else here. Leaky gut, hypothyroidism. The weird thing is I suddenly had a gluten sensitivity among like 20 other food sensitivities out of the blue. And my blood test showed that my blood was extremely high in aluminum and lead. So I also a lot of
Is that adjuvanted with aluminum?
Yeah, so the adjuvant in Gardasil is aluminum.
Okay.
It's in Gardasil 9, there's 500 micrograms of aluminum per shot. And the FDA safe limit for aluminum exposure is 25 micrograms. So an insanely large amount of aluminum. If you get all 3 shots, that's way over the FDA safe limit. I wish I would have known that before. And so, yeah, I'm basically just left with a slew of conditions. And, the other thing, a lot of specialists were speculating that I had POTS, which is the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And I never got the specific test for that, but that is one that really plagues Gardasil girls. A lot of us get POTS or POTS-like symptoms, all these autoimmune conditions. But it was weird for me. My heart rate was extremely low. So, a normal heart rate's like 60 to 100, and mine was at 40.
Wow.
And again, no explanation. It was just, oh, that's just happening to you. And so we thought the response from everyone we were seeing was, okay, they're going to want to know about my Gardasil injury. They're going to want to investigate this. What if there's something wrong with that lot of Gardasil? What if other girls get that
Yeah.
lot and there's an issue. We weren't even thinking it's just the vaccine in general. We were just thinking they need to start investigating, like there could be a problem with this vaccine right now.
Yeah.
And that was not the response we got at all. And it was terrible because every single person we met with, we were saying, well, what about the Gardasil vaccine? Because she just had that third shot and she ended up in the hospital right after that with all these issues. And every single person was, it's all in your head. You're just stressed. You're lying. You're making it up. It's impossible. How dare you suggest the vaccine could be related? That vaccine is safe and effective. There are no risks. Any risks are unsubstantiated. And, thank God for my mom at this time, because she was really the one who was being the rock, doing the research, and she was networking. And, it didn't take long. When you just Google Gardasil vaccine injuries, you're going to find a lot. And so she was connecting with a lot of other people and just finding that these Gardasil girls, they have the same exact story as mine, where they are perfectly healthy. They get the vaccine. All of a sudden they have neurological, autoimmune, digestive issues, the whole thing, and so she's, trying to tell these doctors, I've been doing my research. I'm seeing some science that indicates there's risk. I'm meeting a lot of other people who went through the same thing. And just repeatedly we were dismissed, and it was a very frustrating process. And it was kind of like a slap in the face, because we had trusted the medical system and done everything they said. And then when we needed them, they turned their back.
Yeah. Who was held responsible? It was you.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
And not just held responsible, but demonized for it almost, right?
Yeah.
Like,
right.
It's your fault. Like you're bad for having had these symptoms or these injuries or these, or how dare you even suggest that it could be connected to this?
Right.
Vaccine.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Exactly. And there's nothing that'll wake you up to, the problems in our current medical system more than that experience, because it was very eye-opening. And again, these were the pediatrician, especially, that was someone we had really had a good relationship with. And then the second we started asking questions and we went back and we said, look, this happened. And to his credit, his office did file a report to Merck. They did acknowledge it was a vaccine injury. And then they told my mom about VAERS. So they encouraged us to file a report to the vaccine adverse event reporting system. So they did do that, but it's still, we never went back, and it was a very cold goodbye,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, at least they did that, but like,
Right.
that's just, I mean, it's just crazy to me. So what do you think, what's your take on like why are doctors and the medical community at large so resistant and unwilling to even consider this possibility?
I've wondered that a lot. And, I used to just think I think part of it is maybe they don't, because they are the ones administering the vaccines. Maybe it's hard for them to acknowledge that they can cause harm. Because imagine, thinking you administered something that hurt someone when they thought it would help someone. So for a while I thought it was that. I do think that's part of it. But, now I'm in college, and I'm in basically a pre-med program, and I'm kind of going through the education that one would go through to become a doctor. And I have to say, it's kind of frightening, because it really is, there's some great things I'm learning, but it is a brainwashing that you go through, because they spend so much time talking about other issues. And when they talk about vaccines, I'm normally in this one class, I'll use an example. We have 2-hour lectures. When we got to the vaccine topic, it was 5 minutes. It said vaccines save lives. The World Health Organization says that smallpox has been eradicated, and vaccines, Andy Wakefield was debunked. They always say that one. And that was it. That was the extent of my education on vaccines. And obviously I'm still going through the education. Maybe they'll go into it again more, but you're really just told they're safe and effective. This is the schedule. You should administer them. And that's it.
Yeah. From what I've heard from other medical professionals, that's pretty common. Like I've heard even like 1 day or less than 1 day of education for the entire medical education career.
Right. Right.
on vaccines. And what you do get is not really education, it's propaganda, right? It's not,
Yeah.
they're not
Yes.
going into the science, they're not going into why it works or how it would work, or why would you even need it, or why are the adjuvants in there, why are the toxic ingredients in there, or what is going to mitigate those effects on somebody's body, or what about certain genetic mutations that would make things worse for some person over another like none of that
Right.
is talked about in medical school when it comes
Right.
to vaccines. So
Right. And it's just really interesting because like my fellow classmates and the doctors I met, like they're really smart and they're brilliant, and that's
mhm,
why I'm just sitting here thinking, like, why aren't you asking questions?
right,
How are you accepting this at face value as a good explanation of vaccines, as a good education on them? Because we're not
mhm,
learning anything at
yeah,
all. They didn't have to substantiate anything, any of the claims they made. They just told us these
right,
things.
no
And
sources cited, yeah,
it's sad because if I had not gone through what I did with Gardasil, I probably would have been the same way. I probably would have
right,
just thought that was okay because it's unfortunate, but it really takes going through an experience like this and waking up and taking a step back to see the flaws in the
mhm,
system. So
yeah,
yeah, it's definitely been eye opening going through the education because you just realize they're not supplying any evidence about
right,
anything they're saying. It's just they're safe and effective, administer the vaccines.
yeah. And I think along with that, I think that they're emotionally manipulating doctors and all of us, right?
Mhm.
Because if you say the word vaccine to anybody in the world, there's an immediate emotional response.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
either it's um like, oh, they're the greatest thing that we've ever invented, and they're saved all these lives and they're amazing. And anyone who doesn't agree with that is stupid, evil,
Mhm.
they're just some mommy blogger or
Yeah,
reading
exactly. I was just
blog,
gonna
right?
say mommy blogger.
Yeah.
That's their famous line, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
they're science deniers or they're whatever, right? And
Mhm.
so it's emotional conditioning. And so
Yeah.
now when even doctors who are, I think, generally very smart people, and I also think generally have great intentions and
Yeah.
really want to
Mhm.
do good and help people, but they are just as prone to conditioning or bias or manipulation as anyone else. They're just people. And
Mhm.
so when they grow up in this environment, and we're all kind of, I think now at this point, most people are fairly aware of vaccines and the anti-vaccine,
Mhm.
movement or whatever, um, the quote unquote anti-vaccine. But
Right.
so I think everyone already has an emotional precondition toward
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
now you get like you go into medical school and that just furthers it because or that's where it grows or even starts for doctors because they're not taught any of the science. They're just taught emotion about it. They're safe
Mhm.
and affected, and if you better do them or else people are going to die. And
Mhm.
if anyone questions them, they're dumb and you need to re-educate them or whatever, you know,
Mhm.
or there's a lot of shame and kind of dismissiveness around it. They'll
Mhm.
even, I think, at times talk pretty mockingly about it in medical schools,
Yes.
like make fun of those mommy bloggers, right?
Right.
Who question it, and
Right.
it's all just emotional conditioning. So that
Right.
then when you get into the real world and you get into your practice, and someone comes to you like you and says, "I have all of these symptoms, and could they be related to this shot that I just got?" I mean, cause and effect. I mean, it makes sense. Why not, as a scientist, you would say, "Hmm, that's interesting. I should probably look at that
Right.
scientifically, unemotionally, logically. There is a timeline here. Doesn't mean that you're saying I believe that the vaccine did it, but you should at least, as a scientist, consider it,
Right.
But
That's a great point. I actually just posted about this on my Instagram because I was thinking about it, and denying vaccine injury is just inherently anti-science
right,
because you are rejecting someone's observation and you're
right,
not even investigating it, and you are just turning to the consensus belief
mhm,
that vaccines are safe and effective. So you're eliminating any debate or
mhm,
investigation or what happened to using the scientific method and going through all these steps to investigate something
yeah,
that doesn't happen with vaccines. It just
yeah,
gets shut down. And that, anti-vaxxers are called anti-science, but we're not. I mean, the ones
Mhm.
who are denying our stories, that's really who's being anti-science.
Right.
And,
Totally.
from personal experience, just going back to these medical professionals, I've dealt with many. And, within that first week, I had, after my third shot of Gardasil, I had met like probably 17 different specialists. It was an ongoing process meeting these people. And I met people who really did have good intentions, I think, and were trying to help me. But
Mhm.
just when we suggested Gardasil, it was like you said, that emotional, nope,
Yeah.
that can't happen.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I did also, on the other hand, I met some very egotistical medical practitioners who completely mocked us and were rude, and we left their practice, just ended up walking out of the building because it was that bad. I actually had one of the last experiences I had with mainstream medicine before we said, okay, we're done with this. We're
Mhm.
looking for some other opportunities here. One of the last people I met with was a pain specialist, and we waited in his office for like 2 hours probably, and we were going to see him about the occipital neuralgia. He got in the room with us, sat there for maybe 10 minutes, told me that I needed a nerve block. So they were going to block the nerves at the base of my skull. They weren't going to look at any other solutions. That he said,
Right.
this is the only thing that could help you. And then, we brought up Gardasil, and he said, oh, no, unrelated. And he said, this is actually a fairly normal experience for young girls. I'm having a lot of 13-year-olds come in here needing nerve blocks. So I'd say this is pretty normal. It's nothing out of the blue. And I'm sitting there thinking, now we're researching. We know
Uh-huh.
about the risks. I'm thinking, these are Gardasil girls.
Right. How many of them
13
have
year
this?
olds Yeah, 13 year
Yeah.
olds should not have to come into your office needing nerve blocks.
Right.
That's not normal.
No.
And so, again, I've just seen there are some really well-intentioned medical practitioners out there, but there are some that are really struggling.
Yeah.
We're lacking in some compassion for
Yeah.
sure.
Totally. You
Mhm.
definitely run the gamut. I think that, and there are all these variables for why, but at the bottom line is like, this is a real experience for a lot of people. And it needs to, like, it's not okay to dismiss it. And
Yes.
I mean, it needs to be addressed, and regardless of whatever your feelings are on it, as a doctor, I mean, you take an oath to first do no harm,
Yes.
and you've got to get out of your own way, and
Mhm.
and let go of your pride, and consider these things openly with an open mind instead of an emotional response.
Exactly. And just repeating over and over again that vaccines are safe and effective and that vaccine reactions are 1 in a million, that doesn't make it true.
Right.
And if you're not even going to allow people to talk about it or investigate it, that's not moving forward. That's not science
Right.
at all.
That's not productive. That's not, yeah, not science. Totally.
Mhm.
So, after you went and you went to the mainstream or the stream or the traditional route, or what's become the traditional route,
Mhm.
um, to all these doctors, and you found this stuff isn't working, and which is something I have found the case with a lot. Like I think doctors are mostly so well intentioned, and I appreciate their desire to help people, but
Mhm.
because of all of the miseducation, or the lack of education, or the manipulation, or whatever, I've found that that is the reality for, so not just vaccine injury, not just but just the response is always either one of two things, right? It's either, here's some drugs to block a
Mhm.
your nerves, or whatever the issue is, or let's do a surgery, and that's like the only
Right.
response. And it's
Right.
like, but why can't we look at root causes, look at addressing the natural healing ability of the body, look
Mhm.
at the way that the nature works, and the way that God designed things. I just don't understand why the only response is, here's some drugs or here's some surgery. But
Right. Exactly.
I kind of digress there. So after you have that experience, you said you went a different route. So what did you do at that point, and where did you kind of find some help?
Yeah. So, we tried to work with mainstream medicine for, a couple months after my Gardasil injury. And at this point, I had been prescribed multiple medications. I was on anti-seizure meds. So they
Mhm.
gave me Topamax.
Yeah,
They
how
want,
old are you at this point?
I'm 13,
God, that's crazy.
13.
That
And
must have been awful for you. Like, just absolute.
yeah,
I mean, 13 is hard enough as it is, right? Like,
right.
then throw on top of that all of this crazy stuff, like the
Yeah.
pain and then all of the dismissiveness and all of the like vitriol toward you. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry for all of that. It's crazy.
Thank you. It was definitely, I would never wish it on anyone.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart. I mean, I get choked up,
Yeah.
but it breaks my heart thinking that anyone else has to go through that
Yeah.
because it's really horrible. And so, yeah, I mean, at this point, I was depressed. And, the other thing I don't think I mentioned, I lost like 15 pounds after that third dose of Gardasil. I was
Wow.
severely underweight. My skin was yellowing. My hair was falling out. I was, at this point, I am visibly sickly. And
Mhm.
I'm at rock bottom. I had to miss those last 2 weeks of my eighth grade year. I had made the varsity volleyball team as a freshman in high school. And,
Mhm.
I tried to keep up with it, but then I ended up having to quit. I had to quit club volleyball. I missed 50 days of school in my freshman year of high school.
Wow.
And yeah, there's no other words except it was rock bottom. And
Yeah.
I wasn't socializing with friends. And, I was still trying to speak up because my biggest fear, honestly, I was like, okay, this has happened to me. This is what it is.
Hmm.
I still wanted to try and reverse it, right, and get healthy. But
Hmm.
I'm just thinking to myself, this happened to me. I need to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. So
Hmm.
I was on, my parents, thank goodness for them, they were emailing all of their friends that they know with daughters, all of our family members, and just saying,
Hmm.
this is happening to Lauren. You need to know the risks. That we were sending resources. I was telling my friends.
Hmm.
Um,
And how was that received?
uh, it's really hard. I mean, I'm grateful because most vaccine injured people I speak with, they don't even have immediate family members that support them. Sometimes their
Hmm.
parents still are in denial about it. Sometimes, you know, their relatives don't believe it, even though they're witnessing it
Hmm.
happen. And so, with me, obviously, my parents and my siblings, we were like a rock solid unit. It really brought us together, and I'm very grateful for that. And my grandparents that live with us, they were witnessing it happen too, so they
Hmm.
believed me, and we were all able to stick together through it. But
Good.
my more distant relatives, my other set of grandparents, did not believe us. And,
Mm.
it was never really said, but the attitude that we get whenever, with this COVID vaccine recently, they're all asking us, aren't you going to go get it? Aren't you going to go get it? And we're like, seriously, after everything,
Right.
you are still asking us, so it was hard. And, my uh, volleyball coach, that was a really hard situation for me because I was really close with her,
Mm.
and she visibly could see my health deteriorating. And I still think to this day she doesn't believe me that I was struggling with some very real chronic illness issues. I think a lot of my teammates thought I was just choking, and it's really
Mm.
hard to think about that because I never wanted that,
Yeah.
obviously, at all. And, I did have friends who, believed me and who stuck with me. But, I did have some friends I grew distant from. And I think
Mhm.
it was really hard. Also, even though some of my friends believed me, I wasn't hanging out anymore. I wasn't
Yeah.
socializing. I wasn't, you know, maybe some days I would go to school, but if they wanted to make plans with me, I wasn't going. So just naturally, I grew distant
Yeah.
because I couldn't health wise even function
Mhm.
to even spend time together. So yeah, it was just a really rough experience. And it was weird because even though we were kind of growing distant, now we were kind of alienated. We did have some poor exchanges. We ended up attracting more people that had gone through
Mhm.
similar things. So I had a girl that I barely knew at school. She had heard me talking about the experience. She came up to me later and said, my brother was paralyzed the waist down after getting the DTaP vaccine.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my goodness, like, I'm so sorry. And then I had a very distant relative, um, like my grandma's brother's son, it was a very distant
Mhm.
relative who sent me a letter and was saying how his daughter was injured by Gardasil and his younger son developed autism after the
Mhm.
MMR vaccine.
Mhm.
And, we started having all these connections with people who were saying, I went through something similar. And it was very eye opening because I had never heard of this. And now all of a sudden, like all these people are coming and
Yeah.
connecting with us. And then I ended up having an interview with Vaxxed.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Mhm.
yeah. And so their bus came to Michigan. I got to meet the Vax crew and we did an
Cool.
interview, and my mom shared it on Facebook, and a bunch of people from my district from school saw it. And I didn't realize that had happened. And I was going to school and I had kids coming up to me like, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that you were going
Wow.
through that. So it was weird because at the same time, there was people who were treating us poorly. Those relationships were dying out. There was people coming forward and saying like, I believe you,
Yeah.
I can
Right, right.
relate, things like that. So it was kind of a mix of both. I do think I'm very lucky with my situation because I've heard the people I've met who've been vaccine injured, there are much worse situations where there
Mm.
was just zero support.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I do think I was lucky
That's good.
in that
Yeah.
regard.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. So
but
then you guys went and you went a different route after that.
yes, yeah. So yeah, I guess we kind of went on
Yeah, that was my
another
fault. I
topic
asked it, but yeah.
there. No, it's okay. But yeah, so we actually weren't really familiar with this is another thing. We were uneducated. We didn't even know like there was a holistic health field, right?
Mhm.
And it was actually a friend of my mom's had seen my story and had heard what happened to me, and she reached out and said that she knew of a naturopathic doctor in Michigan who
Mhm.
was working with girls who had been injured by Gardasil.
Okay.
And that was like a oh my goodness moment for us. And so we immediately called his office and we tried to schedule an appointment. And he is normally booked like 6 months to a year out. So when we
Wow.
initially scheduled that appointment, they said, it's probably going to be like 6 months. You're going to be put on a waiting list. But, I'll put you on. The woman that was talking to us said she put us on like a priority list because she could tell like I had a very
Yeah.
serious issue.
And
And
did
so
he work mostly with those who were injured?
yeah,
And
he's
and
a
there's a waiting
naturopathic
list
doctor. Yeah, yeah,
that long. That
exactly.
should tell you
It's
something, right?
very telling, right?
Yeah.
And not just with Gardasil girls, but his office also works with uh, kids with autism as
Mm.
well. So that was really interesting to be in that office and kind of experience how it worked. But um, yeah, so it was crazy because within a week of us scheduling like that far off appointment, they called us back and said, someone had canceled, you can come in the next day. And we were
Wow.
able to get in. And I swear I was not a very religious person, but I, at this point was praying. I was like,
Yeah.
please someone help me
Yeah.
because I need it.
Yeah.
I'm dying here. I don't know what else to do. And I remember my mom told me, I'm getting choked up again, but
It's okay.
um, I just remember I was crying because it was the first time we felt like, okay, that we could be helped now. Like there's
Yeah.
some hope here.
Hope, yeah.
And so we went in, we met him. His name is Dr. James Neuenschwander.
Okay.
He's pretty outspoken about vaccines.
The
Just
name
within,
sounds kind of familiar, but I
yeah,
remember.
yeah. He's attended, I think, like a few of like the ACIP meetings, and he's pretty
Okay.
vocal about vaccine risks and everything.
Mhm.
So, but anyways, when I met him, he literally sat down with me and my mom for like 3 hours, and we talked about vaccines and food and my health issues, really getting to like the root cause here. He
Mhm.
explained to us about the aluminum adjuvant and how heavy
Mhm.
metals work in the body. And we talked about polysorbate 80 and how that could affect the blood brain barrier. Polysorbate
Mhm.
80 is an ingredient in Gardasil.
Yeah.
And so, it was a whole new world for us. It was a
Yeah.
completely different response. He was compassionate, and the
Yeah.
staff there was amazing. And so in his office, it was really cool because he had an acupuncturist, other health practitioners. He had a homeopathy specialist. So,
Mhm.
it was about an hour from my house, but I would drive there like multiple times per week with my mom, and we would just go. I would meet with the acupuncturist, and we would talk about the food I was eating. So it was a very holistic healing, and I started on a
Mhm.
heavy metal detox protocol. So we
Okay.
started doing all these holistic modalities, and I started to get better.
Yeah.
So it was quite a very
Yeah.
different experience than
I
what
I
I had
can
gone through.
Yeah, I can imagine that after having the experience that you did with, you know, allopathic medical doctors, then going and having this guy completely validate everything that you were going through and and offer solutions. It
Mhm.
must have been just like, a huge burden lifted off.
Yeah, even just to have someone listen and
Yeah.
understand and show compassion,
Hmm.
it was just so different. And to say like you're not alone in this.
Hmm.
Other girls your age are going through this too. And obviously it broke my heart to hear other people were going through it, but just to know you're not the only person, I mean,
Yeah.
it was just a complete game changer. So yeah, basically for the next couple of years, I was changing my diet. So, that was a huge part of my healing journey was
Hmm.
cleaning up my diet. Cause again, my family was very uneducated about health. We were, we cared about our health and we were athletic and like a moving family, but we were eating the standard American
Hmm.
diet.
You just
So
didn't
that,
know. Yeah.
right, right, exactly. We just didn't know there was another way or a better
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So, I had been diagnosed with gluten sensitivity, non-celiac. So I had already
Okay.
eliminated gluten, and that in itself was really helpful for me. It wasn't like the end all solution, but it
Hmm.
was really helpful because I started being able to maybe eat a little more food, and I wasn't intentionally not eating anymore because that it was hard
Right.
when you're having all these painful symptoms. You don't want to eat anymore.
Right. Yeah. You're
But,
afraid, what can I eat and what
right.
won't make me feel awful?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so then I ended up also eliminating dairy, eggs, kind of just like processed food in general.
Hmm.
And eventually, a couple years into my journey, I ended up going plant based because
Okay.
my digestion, I was really struggling to digest meat. And this is
Mhm.
another thing I've kind of noticed. Some Gardasil girls do really well with me, others can't digest it.
Mm.
Like I could not digest meat. It was making me so sick. So
Mhm.
I've been plant based for a while now, and just bringing in the fruits and the vegetables and eating whole foods, that in itself was just a huge, huge factor. And I can't say enough about it. The
Mhm.
diet was really everything.
Mhm.
And over time I started seeing improvements. And yeah, and I still eat that way. I still have to be very vigilant because if
Mhm.
I, eat a food that I had previously reacted to, it's triggering. But I don't know. I enjoy the way I eat now because I don't feel sick. So it's worth it to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, diet is something that is, man, it's probably the biggest factor for our health,
Hmm.
and maybe the most misunderstood,
Yeah.
seems like, and at least in America,
Yeah.
where, like, even because so on my own kind of health journey, that was one of the bigger first lessons I learned, was like, you've got to change your diet. Like, you just have to.
Yeah.
You can't, like, you start to learn about what the standard American diet is and what it is not, and even back before then, like, when I before I learned about diet, it was like, what I thought was healthy, a healthy diet, was like just still processed nonsense, right? It was
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
like, it was just like, oh, but I got a salad at like some fast food restaurant, or I got, but it's chicken, chicken's a
Mhm.
good healthy meat, but it was grown and it was raised in a cage with a bunch of antibiotics and
Right.
fed like a poor diet, and that's doused in glyphosate and all that, right? So it's like, I was still getting, until you learn what everything is that's happening in the world surrounding our food, and you realize how far you have to go out of the mainstream. Like, you can't just go
Yes.
to the restaurant, you can't just go to, I mean, you can go to the store now, you start to learn what you can, and there's so, thankfully, so much more available now, like organically grown, and
Mhm.
even, and gratefully, like, more local stuff. I don't know where it's like where you are, but there's more here
Mhm.
than there used to be. But still, like, you can't just go, like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm gonna go grab something at Wendy's or whatever. Like, it,
Right.
it's there's too much toxicity
Mhm.
within the food production system
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that,
Exactly.
that impacts us in so many devastating ways, that we just can't be healthy while living and eating the standard American diet. It's just not really possible, I don't think.
Right. 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 And that is so true. And I'm just, thinking of my family, that whole thing of we thought we were eating healthy. You mentioned that we
Mhm.
went through the same thing because we were eating the standard American diet, but like my mom's like, oh, I'm occasionally cooking home cooked meals. That's good.
Right.
My school lunches were all processed like Lunchables and stuff. But I was thinking, oh, I'm getting these food groups. It's fine.
Right. The food
So it
groups.
was a huge
Mhm.
learning curve for us to take a step back and be like, what are we actually putting in our bodies? And that's another thing. I'm incredibly grateful for my family because I can't imagine if I had to do that lifestyle shift by myself,
Yeah.
because my parents especially took so much initiative. Because I mean, at this time I'm so chronically fatigued,
Yeah.
I don't have the energy to even make my food or do
Yeah.
any of that. So my mom and my dad really like stepped up and were, changing my diet for me and helping me to find
Yeah.
things to eat. And they themselves ended up eliminating some of these foods like gluten and dairy. And it was
Mhm.
crazy to watch my family's overall health shift because
Mm.
my dad got off some painkillers for his back. He lost 40 pounds.
Wow.
My mom lost a ton of weight. My dad's allergies and asthma completely went away. My
Yeah.
brother's allergies got better. Um, my sister was healthy, so I mean,
Mm.
I don't know about her, but our whole family just kind of was elevating health, and it was
Yeah.
just really, really cool to watch, honestly, because I was like, okay, well, I was injured by Gardasil, but this is a positive out of it because we're,
Right.
learning and we're growing and we're
Yeah.
getting healthier. I mean, my dad getting off those medications was huge. So
Yeah.
it was definitely a huge learning experience, and I'm very grateful for my family because they did it all with me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that food aspect was crucial.
That's huge. Well, that's awesome. It really does help to have support. Like,
Yeah,
my dad was always into natural health, and that's so when I changed my diet, he was already kind of along that path, and I mean, I had to do it so that like I basically had to plan out and just like basically eat the same thing every day, but it's only because the stress of like if I have to figure out what am I going to eat, like it's
hmm,
too much stress, so I just won't do it. So I had to just like find something that I could eat pretty much the same every day that's healthy, and then I could go forward because changing the diet, I know how hard that can be for people.
right,
Not
right,
having the support or not having the plan in place and then being able to execute it is, I think, a barrier for people to just like, I'm not gonna. And we're such emotional eaters, right? Because it's such
right.
we get such an emotional response from like all of the neurotoxins in the processed food that we eat,
Mhm.
that like you feel bad, well, just run and grab a pizza or run and grab some ice cream or whatever. That like we've really, it's so much harder to now like then food, when food becomes a stressor, then
Right,
it's like, "Ugh, I'm not gonna." That's how people fall off the wagon so much, or like, I'm
right,
not gonna do this. So
right.
that's cool that they were supportive of you.
Yeah, and it's honestly sad because I'm connecting with so many young girls and boys too who they suffer vaccine injury, or maybe they just have
Mhm.
some chronic illness and they're trying to eat healthier and do better. But if their family, they live with their parents still because they're young, their
Yeah.
parents aren't going to buy the groceries they want, or if their
Mhm.
family's not going to be on board and eat some of these things with them, it's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I made my account on Instagram, because I was thinking, okay, I can be a support for people and
Mhm.
try and just, I can't do much, across the world over social media, but at least they can know, like, I understand what they're going through, and I
Yeah.
can kind of just try and be motivational through it, because that support is crucial. And just knowing
Totally.
you're not alone, you have a system that's raising you up through all these things you're going through.
Mhm.
I mean, I was severely struggling with depression. I mean, it's something I
Mhm.
didn't really talk about much, but my family could tell. I was very depressed, and if they had not been there for me, it could have ended very badly for me, for
Yeah.
sure. So
Yeah.
very grateful for them.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think that's one of the main kind of goals of this podcast is connection, because I think that we
Mhm.
need community, we need each other so much, and that's one of the devastating effects of this whole,
The quarantine.
yeah, COVID
Yeah.
stuff, is that like not only like you like quarantining people and saying you can't be around each other, but then the social distancing, but and all that, but like kind of the emotional um, conditioning to divide people. So now
Mhm.
you have, right, like uh, you have people who are like, oh, you have to be wearing a mask everywhere you go. And then you have
Right.
those of us who are like, okay, let's look at the science and let's look at what's going on behind the scenes and who's profiting and all this. And it creates an automatic divisiveness, the mask especially, because
Right.
it's it's a symbol. I mean, it's right on somebody's face. You can see immediately if, okay,
Right.
that person is my enemy if they're not wearing one, or if
Right.
they are like
Right.
that. And so that this whole thing has created more and more divisiveness. And I think that I mean, you talked about, depression, and obviously that has skyrocketed over this last year and a half or whatever now. So it's like, um, because of we're social creatures and we need connection, and that's being, just taken away, or like
Right.
conditioned away or manipulated away
Right.
from us.
Exactly. Especially when, our society is just gravitating to this polar opposite viewpoints. There's no
Mhm.
meeting in the middle anymore. And,
Right,
I first started seeing that with the vaccines. It was either you're pro or against,
right,
no middle ground. And then,
yeah,
with politics, left and right, no middle ground. And,
yeah,
it's with everything, mask, pro or anti mask. Like,
yeah,
I mean, some of the issues I could see maybe being polar opposites, but like, it shouldn't be like that. We should be allowed to, or be able to have some conversation to maybe
yeah,
meet in the middle sometimes, or, at least talk about these things without having that automatic, I'm against you
right,
response. And,
totally,
you lose all that connection we were talking about.
yeah,
It's really horrible.
absolutely. Oh, it's so hard. So, with all that said, we can talk a little bit about the vaccine that's coming out now, and what are your thoughts on it, and some of the research that you've done, and some of the
I
concerns that you have.
I mean, I honestly, this is something I've been researching, but I feel like there's just so many unknowns. It's
Hmm.
kind of even hard to speak to it.
Hmm.
I definitely feel though, if you've had a previous vaccine reaction, you should absolutely not get it. I've had people on my page ask me if I vaccinate anymore, and the answer is a hard no. My family
Hmm.
does not vaccinate anymore, and we respect others people's decision to
Hmm.
vaccinate or not. But we've done our research and we're not comfortable with the risks anymore. We didn't realize that they
Hmm.
were there, but they are, and they're often understated. The benefits are overstated.
Hmm.
So we don't vaccinate. I'm not going to be, none of my family is going to be getting the COVID vaccine. And you know, other vaccines aside, I just feel like this one is too experimental, too rushed. I mean, Gardasil was fast tracked.
Was
And
it?
yeah,
I didn't know
and
that.
look how that turned out, right?
Yeah.
And just looking off the adverse events that we're seeing come in regarding the COVID
Yeah.
vaccine, I don't think it's worth it at all.
Right.
And
Right. Especially when you look at the data for the infection fatality rate and all of like, I just don't really understand the rationale for it,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, and I mean, the Pfizer and Moderna have been pretty open about saying, the vaccine does not prevent
Right.
transmission.
Yep.
It probably doesn't stop you from getting it. At best, it might reduce your symptoms.
Right.
And that's a huge might, right? They don't really even, they can't really
Yeah.
even say that.
Yeah. They
So
skipped animal trials, went right to human
right,
trials, and
right,
like and looking at the past virus attempted vaccines, like in those animal trials, like you find what's it called? The priming, right? So
the
when they
pathogenic priming is
pathogenic primings, right? So like once they introduced, they gave them the vaccine to or so it's the mRNA vaccine, I guess, right? Is that's the ones that they had the issues with, that they once they then exposed the animals to the virus, it made it way worse, because it taught their immune systems that this virus was no big deal, was a friend, right?
right.
We don't need to worry. We don't need to create antibodies. We don't need to,
Mhm.
because the mRNA had been conditioning their cells to view it as, you know, not a big deal. And so then and so like you have this kind of uh, stuff coming as a precursor to, that's what this, vaccine is. And I use quotation marks because it's not really a vaccine, right? It's like um it's not designed the same way that the other vaccines are. It's it's an mRNA vaccine, like you said, highly experimental, and we don't know what's going to happen with it. And we rushed
Right.
or skipped animal studies, and we rushed it. Like, I just don't like.
Right.
I'm
And
not interested in it at all. And for me, but
right. And I mean, from my experience, just comparing the narratives and just the
yeah.
actual facts between HPV and COVID, there's a lot of similarities with the
Hmm.
way that they're pushing COVID. And I don't like seeing it, honestly, because, HPV was a virus. It was very hard for them to sell a vaccine just about HPV because it's something that's very common. Most people who
Hmm.
get it do just fine with it. If you have some of these, you know, other things going on in your health, then it becomes more of an issue. Like if you're overweight, if you're a
Hmm.
smoker, things like that.
Yep.
And when you look at COVID, same thing.
Yep.
It's now we know the survival rate is extremely high,
Yep.
greater than 99% for
Hmm.
people younger than 70, right?
Hmm.
And
And we know what the
same
risk
thing.
factors are, right?
Right, exactly. We know what the risk factors are. And now they're trying to push a vaccine that we don't know the full extent of risk, but
Yeah.
it's really not necessary. And,
Yeah.
they've really done a great job fear mongering and pressuring people, which is exactly what they did with the HPV vaccine.
Yeah. So
And
they connected. So HPV. So how did they then sell it if it was
cervical cancer,
right?
because,
So that's what I was going to say. So it's like, do you
right.
connect it to something else? And is that a greater risk? I mean, does
No,
it
so
present a
the
great?
thing the thing with HPV, so you have 80% of Americans will get HPV at some point of their life. It's something that 90% of those people will overcome naturally. Out of the other 10%, less than like 0.05% will have HPV that leads. Sorry, my dog's scratching at the door.
No, it's
Sorry,
okay.
Stuart. But yeah, less than 0.05% of that remaining 10% will have HPV that leads to cervical cancer. And at best, they think less than 30% of cervical cancers have that HPV genetic material in it. So
Mhm.
the way they related HPV to cervical cancer is still very sketchy because, they're saying, oh, HPV absolutely causes cervical cancer when really recent research is showing it might be associated.
Right.
It's different. So
Correlation does not equal causation or whatever.
right. And so anyways, with HPV, it's clear this is not a huge issue. So what they did is they
Mhm.
start saying, okay, HPV strain 16 and 18, those cause cancer and cervical cancer is bad and we need to fight that. But then when you look at the cervical cancer stats to the age group that they are marketing this vaccine to, it does not make any sense. You
Really?
know, to get this vaccine if you're talking about cervical cancer because a healthy 13-year-old child has a basically 0% chance of getting cervical cancer, much less dying from it. And so
Mm.
cervical cancer takes years to develop. It is a serious condition, but it takes years to develop. If you are getting frequent pap smears, you can catch it early on, and the 5-year survival rate of people who catch it early on is like 90%.
Mm.
And it's the median age of diagnosis for cervical cancer is 50 years old.
Mm.
This vaccine might protect you from HPV strains for maybe 5 years. So why you would give it to an 11-year-old child
Right.
makes no sense. Right. And so then, the death rate of cervical cancer is like 2.3 per 100,000 people in America. And, there's clear research showing that in like a country like America, where we have good, health services, frequent pap smears, people catching early on, your chance of surviving cervical cancer are great because if you catch it early on, they can, remove the cancer cells. They can do these things to help you prevent it. And, it's really I don't want to say a non-issue because it is serious for those who get
Sure.
it. But, if you're taking care of your body and you're getting the pap smears, like it's a very low risk for you. And,
Right.
in other countries where they don't have the health services and the good nutrition and the
Mhm.
things that we do here, you see much worse stats on cervical cancer.
And
So
do they
anyway,
use those international stats to push it?
I mean, if you look at Merck's website or if you look at some of their like HPV vaccine Gardasil websites, they don't even really refer to stats. They just are telling you words.
Mm.
Get this to protect you from cancer. So
Mhm.
And I mean, they use a stat. I was just at a vaccine symposium with Robert Kennedy Jr. and some
Mhm.
of the more outspoken people. And my dad actually asked this question because Merck consistently uses the saying that, HPV strain 16 and 18 are account for over 70% of cervical cancers. So if you get the vaccine, which has strain 16, 18 in it, you're protected from cervical cancer. So they make that statement, but then research is showing, like, there's newer studies coming out, like I mentioned earlier, saying that less than 30% of cervical cancers have this HPV genetic material in it. So how
Mhm.
can they make that claim that you're going to be protected from cancer when, the research isn't really there to
Right.
even really fully support that?
Right.
And
They just saw that, like, oh, this strain is present in those who have cancer, who have
right,
cervical
right.
cancer. Therefore, they're just connecting the dots without any actual scientific evidence to back it up.
Right, right. And I mean, there is some evidence showing the virus could contribute to the cancer, but again,
Mhm.
that's with those other factors, like, are they smoking? Are they
Right.
obese? Are they
Yeah.
having other pre-existing conditions, right?
Yeah.
So, any parent, given and then, I mean, if you want to talk about the adverse reaction rate in the clinical trials of Gardasil, that's a whole other thing. But if
Mhm.
any parent given the true information regarding HPV and cervical cancer, and then the information regarding the actual risk of Gardasil, it's clear that the risks far outweigh any potential benefits. And
Mhm.
that's what I'm seeing with the COVID vaccine. Just to
Right.
bring it back to that, it's just the same thing. You
Yeah.
know, they are manufacturing a crisis, as
Right.
I like to call it. They're making an issue out of air. They don't
Right.
It's something you don't need a vaccine for. If you support your body and your immune system and you do a good job taking care of yourself, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And if not,
That's
we have medical treatments and therapies to help.
Yeah. So I was just watching a presentation by Dr. Simone Gold a couple days ago. I haven't finished it yet, but she was talking about, or no, actually, this one was from a different doctor, Dr. Lee something. Now that's, I'll have to look and find it, put it in the show notes. But like, and she was talking about all of the different medications that we already have that treat it and treat it
Mhm.
successfully and effectively. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and the story about, or the, the kind of what happened, um, in the painting of hydroxychloroquine as this evil, bad, dangerous drug, and how that was manipulated by the media and by those. Like, there are treatments available even if you do get it, and we
Mhm.
know the risk factors, and we know that under age 70, it's basically a non-issue.
Right.
And for those that it is an issue for, again, we know the risk factors. Are you taking care of your health? And that for me is the like eh, that this has been why the reason that this last year for me has been so difficult is because I am a naturally compassionate person, and I want to I get I don't want to come across as cold. I don't want to be cold, right? I don't want to be dismissive of people's um, fear of, or certainly of their experiences. There are people who've
Mhm.
died from it, of course, many, but at the same time, I have to be able to not let my emotions rule me,
Mhm.
and we have to do that as a society, especially, like, and we
Mhm.
have to look at the whole picture and all of the data and what's really going on. What are the risk factors? What are the ages? And the bottom line to me, it comes down to what you just said. It's personal responsibility.
Right.
We have got to stop outsourcing our own health to other people,
Mhm.
even a doctor. It doesn't matter if they're an expert. It doesn't matter if they went to 7 years of medical school. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Nobody can make you healthy. Only you, your choices, only you following the laws of health, eating the right foods, um, living a healthy diet or a healthy lifestyle,
Mhm.
avoiding environmental toxins as much as you can, and then responding when you do have an issue with a healthy, with a way to support your immune system, whether that be supplementation with healthy bioavailable vitamins and minerals and things like that. Um, that's really the only answer to in my opinion, um, to any kind of virus or bacteria or any kind of sickness in general is personal responsibility for our health. And
Right. And I feel like we don't give our bodies enough credit.
right.
I took an anatomy class last semester, and it's fascinating learning about all these systems we have in our own bodies to defend
Mhm,
us. And,
mhm.
you know, I think we give vaccines too much credit. I mean,
Yes.
when you really look at the science, their vaccine immunity compared to natural immunity, it's not long lasting.
Yep.
You're taking on all the additional risks of the vaccine. You're injecting ingredients that have proven toxic effects on the body.
Yep.
And we're letting vaccines take credit for things that good nutrition, water sanitation,
Mhm,
really important things for taking care of your body. Vaccines historically, that's what I'm referring to, have taken credit for a lot of those
mhm,
bigger things, right? So, our society now is turning to drugs and vaccines to be the save all. At the same time, they're consuming this food and
mhm.
being absorbed in technology and doing these practices that damage their health. And I'm so badly just trying to tell people, like, that's not the solution.
Right.
There's a different way. You don't need to rely on these pharmaceuticals for health. There's a whole other world out there if you just step back and look
Yeah,
at the big picture. So,
totally. I mean, it's like you just hit the nail on the head. It's just like it you that's it. I could believe maybe that people, particularly in governments, cared about public health if instead of pushing vaccines, if they or if they at least pushed as much or more proper diet, healthy
mhm,
lifestyle. And I mean, like I had a conversation with a lady a couple of weeks ago about the lockdowns and stuff that were happening here locally, and she said, like, you have all these people, these medical professionals or authorities talking about vaccines and whatever, and yet you've got McDonald, like they shut down everything, right? Shut down all these businesses, all of small businesses and whatever. And they said socially distance and stay inside and don't get out in the sun where you get vitamin D and all that. But then they left McDonald's open and Burger King and all these fast food
right, right,
places, and and their recommendations for for health. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about the food groups, right? So like this food pyramid is just basically nonsense. Like
mhm,
that shows the lack of understanding at that level
mhm,
of what really leads to health in human beings. So why are we taking advice from people who don't really understand what creates health
mhm,
about our own health on a
right.
large scale, who clearly don't really care because they're not promoting, good diet and good lifestyle,
Right, like
and
our
they're
healthy behaviors, right,
exactly, yeah, and personal responsibility. They're just saying, "Don't worry, we'll take care of you. Wait for us. Wait for our vaccine, and then you'll be safe. And then take it, and then it'll be safe.
right,
Oh, and
right,
by the way, don't worry about that. It's making us billions and billions of dollars. That doesn't matter, right? Like,
right. And I mean, that's probably one of the more frustrating things for me right now is this, this whole time we've been told to trust the experts, trust the science,
mhm,
don't ask questions. I mean, Forbes, I posted this, they wrote an article, my jaw dropped because they literally were saying, you are not qualified to do your own research, just
right,
trust the experts. And I remember reading that, like, wow, I could not think of anything more telling of the government and media's position right now. And I know people
mhm,
think it's like conspiracy theory, like to talk about the government in this way, but I mean, really, just look at what's happened.
right.
It's
At a
it's
certain
ridiculous.
point, right? At
Right,
a certain point, you have to you can't just keep ignoring different things, right?
right,
Like
right,
we have to, like, nobody wants to be a conspiracy nut, like, but it's like I don't care anymore if it's a conspiracy. I care if it's true.
right,
So it like conspiracy is a real thing, it
right,
happens. It's happened all throughout history, and it will continue to happen, especially if it goes unchecked, especially if people are afraid to question it and consider it and say, well, you might not have our best interest at heart here, and you're saying things that are untrue, or you're changing your opinion or media is in total lockstep with government. Like it just is, there's
Mhm.
too many weird red flags to completely ignore it. And I gratefully a lot of people are opening up their minds a little bit and saying, you're right, this doesn't make complete sense. But
Right.
still a lot of people are still
Right.
unwilling to consider.
Right. And I mean, and that's something I was really hoping that would come out of this year, because I was looking at this like, okay, the whole world is watching this vaccine
Mhm.
production process. And, they're clearly doing things um, to manipulate results, to conceal
Yeah.
risk. I mean, this is another thing I just posted about. They announced that the placebo group in the COVID vaccine trials was now allowed to get the COVID vaccine. That's exactly what they did with Gardasil,
Right.
where they're eliminating the placebo group. So now you don't even have a
Right.
comparison between those that got the vaccine and those that didn't. And you're
Right.
not going to have any long term safety data. So,
So
for me, I'm thinking, okay, I hope people are watching this. I hope they're paying attention, and I hope they're seeing like there is reason to ask questions. There's
mhm.
reasons to seriously consider vaccine risks. It's not just some conspiracy. And I mean, I've been happy. I think a lot of people did start asking questions, but still, I was honestly kind of disappointed at the amount of people. Um, in my social media bubble that I'm in, I know a lot of people obviously that are awake to this stuff, because
Mhm.
naturally you just connect more with the like-minded people. But in my personal life, people I personally know
Mhm.
who are talking about the vaccine, they still are not seeing it that way,
Yep.
which is really frustrating.
Same here. Yeah. Yeah, it's just it is very frustrating and discouraging. And like I'm fine if other people want to make the decision. That's I would rather they didn't. I mean I want them all to make the decision themselves, but I,
Right.
I'm fine if they choose to take this vaccine, or if they choose to wear masks, or if they choose to social distance and all that. It's your choice. You should always have the choice. But that's
Mhm.
the point. We should all always have the choice.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and you see the push toward limiting or removing that choice, and that is what's scary.
Right. And exactly. And that's why another reason I started speaking up is because I saw this attack on medical freedom, especially with
Mhm.
the push to mandate the HPV vaccine and other vaccines in states.
Mm.
Um, my family was like, we cannot let this happen. Like, people are
Yeah.
just sitting back and letting our medical freedoms be taken away. And once that's gone, that's not something the government's just going to give back. So,
Right.
it's just a huge issue. And I honestly, the scariest thing is seeing people, everyday people, advocate for it.
Right.
Thinking, okay, it's okay. We should mandate this vaccine for the greater good. You should get it to protect the community.
Mm.
You should be forced to do these things for other people.
Mhm.
And I'm just sitting here like, what happened to like personal choice
Right.
and bodily autonomy?
Yeah.
And,
Or
you
like,
know,
have you ever watched a dystopian movie ever? Like, this is
right.
exactly how. I mean, that's a little bit of a joke, but like, but not really.
But yeah, but seriously.
Like, that's how it happens. Um, like, um, tyranny starts or is instituted most easily under the guise of emergency, right?
Right.
Like, and that's how Hitler did it, and that's how it's so easy to do. You just you create you condition an entire populace to believe that there's a major emergency, and you have to do this for the common good, right? The greater good.
Mhm.
But once it's all over, then you'll get your freedom back. And
Right.
that's never once ever happened. Like you'd never get your freedom back.
Right.
And so it's like, it's frightening to see so many, like you said, so many people that I know that are advocating for it, that are pushing it, that are saying, yes, we need to have it. And, it just, oh man, that's one reason why I wanted to have people like you on here and talk about it, because we really need to talk about it, and we need to be able to protect that choice, and to see the whole picture, and to see that that's not just cut and dry. It's not, there is absolutely bias. There is absolutely monetary incentive or power incentive for
Mhm.
people to lie or manipulate, or um, there's just a lot there, and we need to be able to be aware of it. And I think there's enough there for us to put our foot down and say, fine, if you want the vaccine and you want to make it available to everyone, I would recommend nobody take it, but it's your choice. But there must always be a choice.
Right, exactly. And that hit the nail on the head. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And
Yeah.
I always make it clear to people my stance on vaccines. I will never vaccinate again, but that doesn't mean I want to have the right to take away your choice to
Right.
vaccinate, or that I'm going to force my beliefs on anyone. That's not it. I
Totally.
really just advocate for informed consent. I want
Yeah.
you to be able to choose if you want to vaccinate or not, or maybe you want some vaccines and not others.
Yeah.
And you should always have that choice. And you can make your decision fully researched and fully informed of the benefits and the risks.
Yeah.
And you can have that choice. And,
Yeah.
the second we let the government take that choice away, you've lost everything. I mean, if you don't have the right to choose what gets injected into your body,
Yeah.
that to me is insane.
What's the point at that point?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, there is no more freedom anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh man, we could just talk for hours about all this stuff, but I
Really.
don't want to take up your whole night. But so just kind of in closing, what are a couple of thoughts you might have, and in particular, where can people go, or what can people do to learn more, to educate themselves in a, I think one of the things that people, they feel overwhelmed by the idea, like, medical terminology is overwhelming to people. They're like, I don't understand what
Right.
any of this means. And I'm just going to let my doctor do it because he's the expert. He spent all this time, or she spent all this time learning about it. Like, they're the expert, leave it to them. But we
Mhm.
can't do that anymore. It's not going to work. So where can people go and how can they learn more about it in a way that maybe is a little bit more palatable or digestible for them, that they can understand what the risks really are and what the whole picture is?
Right. So, I mean, first, I've got to plug my own website. I've been working really hard on a website, and all those things you were saying, I made my website specifically for parents and for individuals who want to be able to research vaccines in a not confusing way. I mean, that
Awesome.
was one of the hugest obstacles for my family is, jumping into this, not knowing anything about it. Where do you go?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you'll find Google and some of these search engines, they don't show you what you want to see. It just refers to what they want you to see, and it's hard to
Mhm.
get unbiased true sources. And so yeah, I made my website with the hopes that it would be, I'd put all the resources that I would recommend people go to. So my website's hpvvaccinesurvivor.com. And
Awesome.
so, I have a page where I have like a start here page. Like if you're just starting researching vaccines, that would be the sources you need to go to. And I'll just mention some of the biggest places I recommend to go to is the Highwire
Hmm.
TV. Del Bigtree runs that show, and he does a great job breaking down the science. It's not emotion based arguments; it's truly just factual science.
Hmm.
And he brings on fellow, medical professionals and people who, the experts that
Hmm.
we're not allowed to hear from, right? So he brings them all on his show. It's a great resource, and they really break it down for common people who might not think they know medical terms, right? It's a perfect resource. And also
Totally.
Children's Health Defense. Another one. They
Hmm.
just write articles breaking down the science, and they do a great job with that. So also on my website, I have a page dedicated to the HPV vaccine. So any science research, personal testimonials people would need are there. I have recommended books and documentaries. So it's a lot to look at. Oh, and I also
Hmm.
have a page regarding vaccine ingredients. So it's definitely a
Yeah.
lot to look at, but it's there, and you can just kind of take your time to work through it. And I
Yeah.
tried to break it down in a way because I mean, sometimes organizations like Children's Health Defense, they've been talking about vaccine risks and other things for a while. They can get very technical
Yeah.
and specific. So if you're looking for a place to just kind of step back, get to like back to the basics, that's kind of what I try to do with my website, just to break it down.
Awesome.
So
That is
yeah,
awesome. So what was the website again?
hpvvaccinesurvivor.com.
Okay, awesome. I will put that in the show notes, big bold letters, make sure everybody knows to go and check that out, because I think that is just fantastic, and I'm going to go check it out as well.
Thank
Um,
you.
it just so important, so necessary that we all become our own health experts of
Right.
our own bodies, right? And our
Right.
own.
And it's really about empowering yourself
Mhm.
with the information you need to make informed decisions
Yeah.
and to be able to critically think about some of these things, some of the information we are being presented with.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. Oh, so awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for coming on and talking and sharing your story and your knowledge and having this great discussion. It was so fun for me and hopefully educational and entertaining for those who will watch or listen. But I appreciate you being brave and willing to share and talk about this stuff because it's just so important. Like it's to me one of the most important things that we could do right now.
It's
So
definitely, this issue on vaccines is definitely taking a front seat. It's definitely
yeah,
one of the more pressing issues right now. And, thank you again for giving me the opportunity to come on here and talk about it because we don't get the opportunity. Vaccine injured people aren't ever given a platform to
yeah.
seriously talk about their experiences. So I really do appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on here and talk about it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you so much for watching. It seriously means a lot. If you like that video and you want to see more like it, you can find them by clicking on the link right over there.